The strangest moment of my life happened beneath a cheap plastic sprig of mistletoe taped above a conference room doorway at 11:30 on a bright December morning. 1 second, I was carrying 2 cups of coffee and trying to escape the office Christmas party before anyone noticed how desperately I wanted to be somewhere else. The next, my boss stepped directly into my path, looked up at the mistletoe, then back at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Maris Vance was the woman everyone in our company feared disappointing. She rarely smiled, never wasted words, and had spent 3 years making it perfectly clear that work was work and personal feelings belonged outside the building. Yet there she stood beneath that ridiculous decoration while winter sunlight poured through the glass walls behind her, softening the sharp edges of the woman I thought I knew. Her eyes settled on mine, and the faintest smile appeared. "You know the rules." I almost dropped both coffees, because what nobody at that party knew was that 6 months earlier, Maris had quietly saved my life without ever realizing it. Before we go any further, if you believe kindness can change someone's life and that people deserve second chances, please like, comment, share this video, and subscribe to Ecoverse. Stories like this remind us that sometimes the person who seems coldest is carrying a heart full of things they never learned how to say. My name is Callum Ray, and until that year I had been remarkably good at disappearing inside ordinary routines. I was 32, worked as a financial analyst at a mid-sized architecture firm called Hensley & Ward, and lived alone in an apartment that still contained several unopened boxes from when I moved in nearly 2 years earlier. I had convinced myself that being quiet was the same as being content. I woke before sunrise, rode the same train downtown, bought coffee from the same corner shop, worked through lunch, and usually left after everyone else. My coworkers thought I was disciplined. The truth was less impressive. Staying busy meant I didn't have to think about the year before, when my father died unexpectedly and my fiancée decided 3 months later that she could no longer spend her life waiting for me to become emotionally available again. I didn't blame her. Grief had turned me into a locked room. Everyone who cared about me kept knocking, and eventually most of them stopped. Maris was the last person I expected to notice. She was 37, recently promoted to regional director, and famous around the office for remembering numbers nobody else remembered. She could walk into a meeting, glance at a spreadsheet for 10 seconds, and immediately identify the one figure that didn't belong. People called her intimidating because she was composed to the point of mystery. She wore simple tailored clothes, spoke quietly instead of raising her voice, and had a way of wading through uncomfortable silence until people answered honestly. Rumors followed her because people disliked empty spaces in another person's story. Some said she had been married. Others said she had rejected a partnership at another firm because she cared more about control than money. I never knew what was true. To me, she was simply my boss, and for most of my first year under her supervision, our conversations were limited to deadlines, forecasts, and revisions. Then came June. It was the anniversary of my father's death, though no one at work knew. I had barely slept. I arrived before 7, determined to bury the day beneath quarterly reports. Around noon, I received a call from my mother. She sounded cheerful at first, but halfway through the conversation her voice broke. She had found my father's old gardening gloves in the garage and started crying. I listened without knowing what to say. When the call ended, I sat at my desk staring at my computer while every sound around me seemed painfully distant. The office lights suddenly felt too bright. My chest tightened. I couldn't breathe properly. I stood, thinking fresh air would help, but my knees nearly gave out near the elevators. Maris found me there. She didn't ask what was wrong in front of everyone. She didn't announce that I looked terrible or call attention to me. She simply stepped beside me, pressed the elevator button, and said she needed me downstairs. I followed because arguing required energy I didn't have. Instead of taking me to another meeting, she led me through the lobby and outside into the small public courtyard behind our building. It was warm, green, and nearly empty. She bought me a bottle of water from a vending machine, sat on a bench several feet away, and said nothing for almost 5 minutes. That silence saved me. There was no pressure to explain. No demand that I recover quickly. When I could finally breathe again, I apologized for being unprofessional. She looked genuinely annoyed, not because I was struggling, but because I had apologized for it. She told me that whatever had happened, I should go home. I said I had reports due. She said reports could survive one afternoon without me. When I insisted, she asked a question that stayed with me for months: if one of my coworkers were sitting where I was sitting, would I tell them to return upstairs and keep working? Of course I said no. She nodded as though that settled everything. Then she arranged for a car to take me home and reassigned my deadlines without explaining why to anyone. The next morning, there was no awkward conversation. No pity. Just an email with 3 lines telling me to take whatever time I needed and that my workload had been covered. I never properly thanked her. Somehow, gratitude felt too intimate for the relationship we had, so I returned to work and pretended everything was normal. But something had changed. I started noticing things about Maris that I had overlooked before. The way she quietly ordered vegetarian food whenever our intern Priya attended meetings because she remembered Priya's dietary restrictions. The way she stayed late helping a junior employee rebuild a presentation after a software crash. The way she always called the cleaning staff by name. Her kindness rarely arrived with witnesses, which made it impossible to mistake for performance. By December, I had become dangerously aware of her. I noticed the way sunlight caught the tiny gold watch on her wrist during morning meetings. I noticed that she tucked her hair behind one ear when concentrating. I noticed that she drank peppermint tea when stressed and coffee when tired. None of this was useful information, and all of it made me uncomfortable because she was my boss. So I maintained distance. The Christmas party was held during office hours because Maris had rejected the usual evening event. She told HR that people had families, commutes, and lives outside work, and nobody should have to sacrifice their night to prove team spirit. By 10 in the morning, the main floor had transformed. Someone wrapped silver garlands around the structural columns. There were trays of pastries near reception, a small artificial tree beside the windows, and sunlight flooded the entire office after an overnight snowfall cleared into a brilliant blue day. People wore ridiculous sweaters and competed in trivia while holiday music played quietly through portable speakers. I planned to stay 30 minutes. Then Jonah from accounting convinced me to join the gift exchange. Then Priya dragged me into the group photograph. Then somebody handed me hot chocolate. Around 11:30, I escaped toward the quieter conference wing to retrieve coffee for myself and Jonah. That was when Maris appeared from a side hallway carrying a folder. She was dressed differently than usual. Nothing dramatic, just a dark green sweater instead of a blazer, her hair loose instead of pinned back. She looked younger somehow, less like the woman who controlled budgets worth millions and more like someone who might spend Sunday afternoons browsing bookstores. We reached the doorway at the same time. She stopped. I stopped. Then she looked upward. The mistletoe. I actually laughed because the situation was absurd. Maris rarely participated in office jokes. Yet instead of moving around me, she remained beneath it. Her mouth curved into that small unexpected smile. You know the rules. For several seconds, I became aware of everything at once. The smell of coffee. The distant laughter from the main floor. Snow melting into bright streaks on the windows. The fact that she was close enough for me to see the faint freckles across her nose that office lighting usually erased. I told her rules established by whoever had taped plastic vegetation to a doorway probably lacked legal authority. She laughed. I had never heard her really laugh before. Then the sound faded, and something changed in her expression. The teasing disappeared, leaving uncertainty. That frightened me more than confidence would have. Maris Vance looked nervous. I could have kissed her. I wanted to. Instead, I stepped slightly backward and told her that I wasn't going to do something she might regret simply because everyone expected us to follow a Christmas tradition. For a heartbeat, disappointment crossed her face. Then something gentler replaced it. She said that was precisely why she liked me. My entire body went still. Before I could respond, voices approached from the main floor. Maris glanced toward them, suddenly herself again, then walked away with her folder. I stood beneath the mistletoe holding 2 coffees that had somehow become cold. The party continued, but I barely heard any of it. An hour later, I found an envelope on my desk. Inside was a handwritten note asking me to meet Maris at the small cafe across from the building after the office closed for the holiday break that afternoon. She had added one sentence beneath it: no mistletoe. No rules. I spent the next 3 hours trying not to imagine every possible disaster. At 4, most employees left carrying leftover cookies and gift bags. Daylight still filled the city, though the winter sun was already lowering between buildings. I crossed the street to the cafe. Maris sat near the window with 2 peppermint teas. She told me immediately that she understood the complicated position she had placed me in. She said there was no expectation, no pressure, and if I preferred, the conversation could end before it began. Then she admitted something I hadn't expected. Months earlier, the day she found me near the elevators, she had recognized the look on my face because she had once worn it herself. 7 years before, her younger brother, Soren, died in a motorcycle accident. Maris had been the person everyone relied on afterward. She organized the funeral, handled insurance forms, helped her parents, returned to work after 5 days, and accepted compliments about how strong she was. Eventually, she became so skilled at appearing fine that no one remembered to ask whether she actually was. She said grief had made her suspicious of affection because losing people felt unbearable. So she built a life around predictability. Work became safe because spreadsheets didn't disappear without warning. Deadlines didn't abandon you. Numbers didn't die. Then she looked at me and said the strangest thing: seeing me struggle in June reminded her that surviving and living were not the same thing. I finally told her about my father. I told her about my failed engagement. I admitted that after losing one person, I had pushed another away because loving anyone suddenly felt dangerous. I told her I still sometimes picked up my phone intending to call my father before remembering there would be no answer. Maris cried quietly. Not dramatically. She simply listened with tears in her eyes, and for once neither of us pretended competence could protect us from being human. We stayed at that cafe until the staff began wiping neighboring tables. Nothing romantic happened. That was what made it important. There was no kiss, no dramatic confession, no reckless decision. We simply talked. Over the holiday break, we exchanged exactly 3 messages. One was about a book she had recommended. One was a photograph I sent her of my mother's disastrously over-decorated Christmas tree. The last arrived from Maris on New Year's morning. It said she hoped the coming year would contain fewer things we needed to survive and more things worth remembering. When work resumed, we discussed boundaries before anything else. Maris spoke with HR and arranged for my reporting line to be transferred to another director before we explored any possibility of dating. She insisted on it, even though it meant voluntarily giving up oversight of one of her strongest analysts. I respected her more for that. Our first real date happened in late January. It was terrible. The restaurant lost our reservation, it rained unexpectedly, and I spilled sparkling water across the table 10 minutes after sitting down. Maris laughed harder than I had ever seen her laugh at work. We ended up eating sandwiches beneath the awning of a closed flower shop while waiting for the rain to stop. That became one of my favorite memories. Dating her taught me that the woman everyone considered intimidating was terrified of pigeons, loved old mystery novels, couldn't cook rice without burning it, and cried at documentaries about rescued dogs. She learned that I sang badly while driving, collected fountain pens, and still visited my father's grave whenever I felt unsure what direction my life was taking. But healing wasn't immediate. There were days when I pulled away without realizing it. There were moments when Maris became distant because happiness itself frightened her. Once, after an especially wonderful weekend, she barely answered my messages for 2 days. When we finally talked, she admitted that some part of her expected good things to disappear the moment she trusted them. I understood because I felt the same way. We made a promise then. Fear was allowed. Silence was not. That promise changed everything. Months passed. We introduced each other to family. My mother adored Maris almost immediately and embarrassed me by showing her childhood photographs within 20 minutes. Maris's parents welcomed me slowly, cautiously, as though protecting a daughter they knew had spent years protecting them. The following December, exactly 1 year after the office party, Hensley and Ward held another daytime Christmas celebration. I almost laughed when I walked into the conference wing. Someone had placed mistletoe over the same doorway. Maris was standing beneath it. This time she wasn't my boss. She was the woman who had taught me that love did not always enter your life with fireworks. Sometimes it arrives quietly beside you in an elevator, notices that you are falling apart, and gives you permission to stop pretending. She looked upward at the mistletoe and smiled. I walked toward her. There were people nearby, sunlight across the windows, laughter drifting from the party, and 1,000 reasons to feel self-conscious. But I remembered the man I had been the year before. A man who believed keeping everyone at a distance would protect him from loss. He hadn't understood that avoiding love doesn't prevent grief. It only prevents joy. So when Maris asked whether I remembered the rules, I told her I did. Then I kissed her. Not because mistletoe required it. Not because coworkers were watching. Because this time we had chosen each other freely. Years later, the part of our story I remember most clearly still isn't that kiss. It's the bench in the courtyard. The bottle of water. 5 minutes of silence from someone who barely knew me but understood exactly what I needed. People often imagine love begins with attraction, chemistry, or some unforgettable romantic moment. Sometimes it does. But sometimes love begins much earlier, in an act of kindness nobody thinks matters very much. Sometimes someone simply sits beside you on the worst afternoon of your life and refuses to make you feel ashamed for being human. And sometimes that changes everything. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who might need its message, leave a comment, and subscribe to Ecoverse. Your support helps stories about kindness, healing, love, and second chances reach people who may need to hear them at exactly the right moment. And before this story ends, I have one special request. Comment kindness is where love begins if you believe one small act of compassion can change the direction of someone's entire life. Because when I think about that Christmas party now, I don't remember the decorations or presents. I remember winter sunlight pouring through the windows. I remember Maris standing beneath a cheap plastic sprig of mistletoe. I remember how easy it would have been to mistake that moment for the beginning. But it wasn't. Our story began months earlier, when I was breaking quietly and someone noticed. The mistletoe simply gave us the courage to finally look at what had already started growing between us. And maybe that is what second chances really are. Not opportunities to erase what hurt us. Opportunities to discover that after everything we have lost, our hearts can still find reasons to open again.